The second session will now begin.
Thank you, and hi everyone. This is Scott Becker. Welcome back to session 2 of today's summit. We have another information-rich session for you entitled Corralling Costs in a Multi-Cloud Setting, Best Practices from the Experts. Joining us for session 2 is Howard M. Cohen Sr. Howard M. Cohen, I've done this twice now, Howard.
That's great.
Howard, Howard is the senior resultant from the Tech Channel Partners Results Group. He's a 35-plus year executive veteran of the IT industry who today writes for and about the IT channel. And he's a frequent speaker at IT industry events that include Microsoft Inspire, Citrix Synergy, Citrix Summit, ConnectWise IT Nation, Channel Pro Forums, Cloud Partners Summit, and the list goes on. He also frequently hosts and presents webinars for many vendors and publications, including ours. Welcome, Howard. And before I invite you to start your presentation, I'd be remiss if I didn't also say happy birthday. I appreciate you spending your birthday with us for a little while.
Thank you very much, Scott. Yes, today is a very special birthday that further justifies the senior in my title, Senior Resultant. I'm feeling more senior than usual today. Hello, everybody. I'm Howard M. Cohen. By the way, there is no Howard M. Cohen Jr., so disregard that from the man behind the curtain. I am a senior resultant, mainly because results speak, as it says on the slide. People like to say results speak louder. I don't think anything else speaks. I was taught that don't tell me about your effort, tell me about your results. And so I try to stick to that as best I can. Okay, so today we're here talking about the big clouds. Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure. When you take them all together, what do you get? Multi-cloud. Now, the reality is, let's be realistic about this. Multi-cloud has been around since cloud has been around, because very early on, people realized that you don't have to get all your cloud services from one place. So while you might get your productivity suite in one place, you might get your security in another place. You might get your automated backup in yet another place. And so we've had a multiple cloud or a multi-cloud approach, what people often refer to as a hybrid approach, for a long time. Today, though, we're talking about multi-cloud as a design ethic. That is to say, using multi-cloud the way people used to use multiple servers. Many environments had some applications that ran under Windows Server. Other applications ran under Linux. Way back, some of them used to run under Novell NetWare. There's all kinds of operating systems and all kinds of requirements that applications have. And so people use different servers for different purposes. Today, in the cloud, we simply use different clouds for different purposes. So that's how we get multi-cloud, but of course, it can be much, much bigger. So let's just very quickly go over a quick agenda for today's session. We're going to start off by talking about how multi-cloud gets out of control in the first place. Costs can run wild, and have, and in many cases, they've impacted the entire industry. We'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about how policy and governance fit into a strategy for controlling costs in the multi-cloud. We'll talk about how solution design contributes. We'll talk about how procurement contributes to controlling costs, how provisioning contributes to controlling costs, how important it is to maintain visibility not only over all the performance issues, but also after all the cost-related issues as well. And then finally, we'll talk about how to manage and control costs along with everything else you need to manage and control in a cloud environment. So let's start off with why multi-cloud costs get out of control. And part of it is indeed sheer volume. Some of it is oversubscribing. In many cases, people subscribe to VMs that they don't end up using. They turn out using more than they expected to use. Oversubscribing is a challenge because you really need to size your application going in. You need to do some capacity planning, some resource planning. In the earliest days, when people first started using cloud, they would subscribe to a specific amount of usage, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, they would get this whopping big invoice, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, what we like to refer to as career-altering invoices. And it was simply because they weren't watching what they were using. People were very excited about this new toy, the cloud, and they just kept on using and using and using, and suddenly they got hit with a bill. This gave rise to the importance of visibility, but it also made us realize that we have to be careful not to oversubscribe and not to undersubscribe either. One way in which you can oversubscribe is it ends up resulting in cloud sprawl. Now, many of you probably remember server sprawl. This is the same thing on steroids. In a server room or in a data center, you can actually physically see the servers proliferating, one after another, after another, after another. And you realize that, each one costs money. In the cloud, it's not that easy. It's not that visible. You can be adding VMs after, and by you, I mean people in your company. It is all too easy to whip out a credit card and order up an instance of a virtual machine. And if everybody's doing that, all of a sudden you're going to find you have virtual machines coming out of your ears. Cloud sprawl is dangerous. And it's something that we need a good strategy to prevent. One of the biggest causes of cloud sprawl is something we all affectionately refer to as shadow IT. In shadow IT happens when a department, for example, or a line of business manager becomes impatient. They requested a new server spun up by IT maybe a day ago or maybe a week ago or more, and it hasn't happened yet. Well, the heck with it. I'm not waiting for them. I'm going to just order it up myself. And it is that easy. So they whip out their credit card and they order up some virtual machines. Now, many people have asked the question, well, how do you combat shadow IT? I'm going to suggest that you don't. I'm going to suggest that you embrace it. If you can embrace it, you can monitor it. And if you can monitor it, you can manage it. So instead of trying to defeat it and trying to wipe it out, get in touch with those departmental managers and talk about how you can bring them under the umbrella of IT. Come join us in the house. Far better strategy, far less disruptive, far more likely to be successful. If you do not, however, if you just allow cloud sprawl to run wild with people ordering up their own VMs all over the place, you are going to end up with zombie assets. I love that phrase. Zombie assets. These are assets that somebody ordered up, never turned off. They're sitting out there. They haven't been used for months. But you're still paying for them. They're still on your bill because the upside of cloud is that it's pay as you go. It's consumption-based billing. You only pay for what you use. It's kind of like that insurance on TV with the big bird. You only pay for what you use. However, they stipulate you only pay for what you use between the time you request it and the time you release it. So every resource that you request must be actively released. Otherwise, they're just going to keep on billing you. And that's where huge overruns in spending can be incurred. Servers that haven't gotten used in a long time. So with VMs coming up all over the place, with unused VMs costing us money, with overages costing us money, how are we going to solve all that? There's a lot going on there. And you're talking about multiple cloud platforms. How are we going to keep an eye on everything? What may even be more important than how is who. Who's going to solve it? Who is going to be sure that we don't do those things? We don't create zombie assets, and we don't oversubscribe or undersubscribe. Who's going to keep it under control? And the answer is just about everybody. In a cloud environment, the upside is that you've got tremendous self-service capability. But with great power comes great responsibility. Thank you, Uncle Ben. So your friendly neighborhood network manager wants you to be sure that you release everything you request. Let's talk about how to control. Start right at the beginning. At the very beginning. I'm talking about before you even have cloud services running. It all begins with policy. Now, if I go back over every webinar I've given over the last 10 years, I've probably said that in almost every one, because everything we do in IT should begin at policy. If you don't have a security policy, you don't need a firewall because you have no policy to enforce. And that's what a firewall is for, to enforce policy. Well, here, if you don't have a policy for cloud utilization, you can't blame anybody when they overrun their expenses. You have no policy. There's no way to enforce a policy you don't have. So it's important that we establish policy right up front so everybody knows what to expect. They have to know that they're being observed using cloud-based governance tools. You're watching. There's something called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle that basically says when something is being observed, that affects that something. So somebody knows they're being watched, they behave better. Well, the same thing is true here. If they know they're being watched, hopefully, they'll behave better and release their resources as soon as they possibly can. This means you're going to be constantly tracking cloud utilization and cost encumbrance. Now, this is what got the big clouds into trouble in the first place. Their customers couldn't track cloud utilization. So boy, were they surprised when they got those big whopping invoices. You're also going to be sure to alert departmental administrators when their VM usage goes beyond their threshold. You're not going to depend upon them to remember. You're going to notify them. You're going to give them alerts. You're even going to schedule operational hours so things get automatically shut down and spun up at a given time. This makes sure that no resource stays zombie for very long, to the end of the day. There are some applications in which you can't do that, things that have to keep on running constantly, but that's just the exception, not the rule. You're going to also alert administrators not just the fact that they're exceeding their thresholds, but also that they have zombie assets out there. They have VMs that are not associated to anything and haven't been used for a set number of days, and you're going to notify them to shut them down, or you will. So you're going to go there and you're going to remove them. You're going to remove any unused or underutilized resource. If a resource is being underutilized, you're going to go change the subscription to get better pricing. Coming back to the concept of planning in advance, it's one thing to just order up a VM. I'm just going to spin up a VM. It's another thing to carefully compute the capacities you're going to require in the utilization of that VM so that you get that perfect balance between performance and cost. Basically, you're looking for good price performance. So do those calculations. There are plenty of tools to help you, plenty of experts out there who can advise you. And it's a good way of saving money that you simply don't have to waste in the first place. You're also going to use policies to automatically terminate servers that were created for big data. Okay, when you're doing big data manipulation, it's very easy to leave a VM out there that's massive in size and very expensive And you've got your results, you're building your reports, and you completely forget about that massive VM. Don't do it. Automate that. Use a policy to automatically terminate that at the end of the process, at the end of once you've got your results offloaded. Okay, so now we've established a group of policies that obviously go much further than we've just discussed, but in the interest of time, I'm trying to give a flavor for the kinds of things we're looking for. I'll share with you a good strategy for making sure you cover all the bases later on. The next stage is solution design. So now you've got a cloud environment to run in. You're going to start to do your dev. Before you do your dev, you're going to design your solution. You're going to design the architecture of that solution, the information architecture as well. This begins with allocation and assignment. You need to make an active decision about where each workload is going to go. For example, if it's a workload that you don't often refer to, you're probably going to tier that into much lower cost storage. So, when you need it, you'll get it. You know you're going to wait, but that's okay. The things you use constantly are in high-speed, high-accessibility storage. It costs a little more, but you need it. It's much more mission-critical, so it justifies its cost. Then you're going to look at the applications involved with your workloads. Some of them will require that they run on a specific platform. There's less and less of this going on now, but still there are some applications that have to be run on a specific platform. Make sure, first pass, that you know about those and you assign them appropriately. And I missed this step, by the way. The first thing that happens here is an assessment of all the workloads that are moving into the cloud. You need to take a thorough inventory, assess each one so you can make these decisions. In addition to those that require a specific cloud platform, there are going to be some that are better supported by one platform over another. Each of the platforms has its own special, unique services, or I call them idiosyncrasies, but they like to refer to them as unique services that nobody else offers. That may help you in running a particular application. If that's the case, you're going to want to allocate that application to that big cloud, if you will. So start doing the research to make sure that you're using the best suited cloud for each application, for each workload. And of course, working best, not just performance. Once again, it's cost effectiveness as well. So which one will run your workload most cost effectively? It sounds like a little thing, but you're going to be using these applications over time. That little thing mounts up day in and day out. And before long, you've busted your budget without batting an eye. So do the homework. Figure out where you have to run an application, where it runs best, where it runs least expensively. In addition to workloads, you now need to start thinking about microservices running in containers. Unlike the monolithic applications we used to use, today every service within an application is its own separate microservice. It's completely independent, and it's packaged in a container along with all the resources it needs to run. This is ideal for cloud computing. It's very easy to instantiate a new container with the right microservices and the right microservice and the right resources, and transport it wherever it needs to go and run it there. It's great, but of course that takes resources. Each of those containers consumes resources, so you need to plan for that. How frequently will each container be instantiated? How much resource does it take up? You need to be able to plan for the utilization that will be required to run your software. Again, with great power comes great responsibility. The best engineers I have met, and this goes back decades, the best engineers I have met have been those that would tell their clients not only the best way to accomplish something technically, but also the most cost-effective way to accomplish it. That is to say, if they're going to be buying licenses for software, here's the plan to use because it will cost you less. And you won't need this and you won't need that. They know the rules. They know what to specify for each operation. And they know what costs the least. Customers appreciate that and absolutely consider it to be part of a good system design. So familiarize yourself with all of the different discount programs and volume purchasing programs, which we'll touch upon shortly. Make sure you're aware of them because they will help you in identifying the right cloud service for each workload that you're running. Remember that you're not talking just about now. You know, at go live, you'll probably have all the right resources in place. But if you haven't anticipated how those resource requirements are going to grow over time, start to break it out this way. Start with dev. What resources are you going to need for your developers to develop the application? Okay. It's a very specific set. Probably not going to scale until it goes live. So that's a pretty easy one to project. User acceptance testing, same thing. You're going to have a pilot program. You'll have a small contained group running the new application to see how it performs. Okay, we're still not worried. But then once you go live and that thing is in operation, in production, you've got to start to think about how it's going to scale and making sure that you're ready to bring on the necessary resources to accommodate that scaling. In other words, you're going to need to begin to forecast what's coming, what kind of utilization you're going to be having as you move down the road, short-term, mid-term, long-term. Not easy, but there are great tools to help you do it. From the perspective of the financial dimension of solution design, which we just very clearly established exists, there is a financial dimension. Not only does it has to run cost effectively, okay? And it has to run optimally. So make it work better, make it work cheaper applies here very, very powerfully. You're going to identify who's using each application, who's benefiting from each workload, and you're going to carefully allocate the costs that you're going to encumber to each of those departments that are involved. Everybody's going to pay their share. This is important for future budgeting, not only on your part, but on the part of those departments as well. If they don't budget for what they need from you, you're going to have a real system design problem coming up on you. There will also be cost centers, things you just have to use that expect no return from you, but they do incur a cost. So identify those as well so you know where all your costs are coming from and where all your funding is coming from so that you can run each workload. In addition, and this is a very important step, it's key to identify the project that each workload resides in, the teams that are creating that workload and that project, and the individuals who are involved in that project. You want to be sure that you establish very clear, very easy to execute approval procedures so that people can't just go willy-nilly and instantiate new VMs left and right. There are specific rules and they're enforced either through automation or through nasty people. But they're enforced to make sure that people don't inadvertently bust the budget. You're going to help them. You're going to make sure that they're alerted when they're getting close. If they're at 80% of their budget, you're going to want to tell them. You're going to want them to know. And then you're going to make sure that you charge back the departments for all of the cloud usage along the lines of the allocations you established. And you're going to use show back in addition to charge back. You're going to show each of the departments what they spent. Now, your goal is to make sure that the company gets the benefits it was looking for the resources that it uses and the costs that it encumbers. One of the things that you get out of identifying the projects, the teams, the individuals involved, the more granular you get, the better, because then you can start to identify trends. And when you identify trends, it's easy to spot the outliers. The outliers are your danger zone. All of a sudden, you see that there's one individual who consistently overruns their budget, or there's one project that is just skyrocketing through its budget faster than any project you've ever seen. Get in front of it. Find out why that's happening, and get control over it early, before it becomes a problem. By looking for outliers, by tracking trends, you can really exhibit tremendous control over the environment that you're managing. I said that procurement is involved as well, and indeed it is. First and foremost, and let this be burned in your brain, multi-cloud procurement requires specialists. You can't take a purchasing agent who's been buying staplers and suddenly have them ordering up reserved instances. Okay, it can't possibly work. There are too many rules, there's too many specifications, there are too many gotchas that you can easily fall into. You need somebody who's a specialist on each platform that's involved in your multi-cloud environment. You need an Azure specialist. You need an AWS specialist. You need a Google EC3 specialist, okay? You need people who know the rules. It could be one person who's really, really well trained and really very, retentive and bright. I've rarely seen people who can master all of that. But at the very least, you need a person for each platform so they can advise you on the reserved instances, on changeable reserved instances, those which cannot be changed, how discounts happen for all kinds of different compromises, and all the other discounted pricing programs that come along, short-term and long-term. You also want to have them available to help you as a purchasing agent determine whether you're going to buy directly from the cloud provider or you're going to go and buy from a broker or an aggregator. These are companies that buy up huge, huge blocks of VMs, other resources, and resell them to you. They get a huge discount for what they buy, and they sell them to you at a somewhat higher price to make their margin. Sometimes you can get a price out of them that's a lot lower than you can directly out of the cloud provider, and it's the same service. So it may be worthwhile, and it's something worth researching. Whatever you do, don't fall into the trap of having different procedures around the way you buy from each of those platforms. It's one thing to know all the different vagaries. One of those vagaries is that they all have different rules for procurement. They all have different categories of products. They all have different criteria for what you're purchasing. No matter what, you need to be the place where all that comes together. You need to have standardized procurement procedures that allow for each of them, that enable you to do the same thing and get the right result with each of those platform providers. So you're standardizing your procurement. You're determining where you're going to get it, what discount programs you're going to take advantage of, and you're going to do it with it takes a village. I mentioned reserved instances. One thing, again, to burn in your brain, when you're using reserved instances to get a lower price, be sure you have management in place for those reserved instances. They are the easiest things to abuse. It is easier to go out of conformance with the rules of a reserved instance than anything else in the cloud. So you need to be sure you've got a very careful eye on the utilization of reserved instances. And it's a management strategy, management tools to keep those under control. Remember, there's only really two ways in which you're going to reduce your cost. One is when the cloud providers reduce their rates, which will happen continuously as they add more capacity, as they become more efficient, as they improve their technology. To remain competitive, they're going to be bringing their costs down, not up. Be careful not to get trapped in a reserved instance that you cannot change and cannot return. Because when that price comes down, you may not be able to take advantage of it. So be very careful with that. That's part of your management. But that is one way in which your cost will come down if you indeed qualify for it. You can reduce your rates by making use of discount programs. The only other way that you have for reducing your costs is to reduce your utilization. And that means figuring out how to get less out of your applications, which is certainly not what your operating departments want, not the way IT wants to perform. It's not great practice. It may be necessary sometimes when you find yourself stuck. Don't get stuck. Okay, we've procured all the services. Now it's time to provision them properly. At this point is where you start to connect into the DevOps team, the team that combines those who develop the software with those who operate the software. For those folks, the name of the game is continuous improvement through continuous deployment. And the way in which they measure their success is speed. The faster they can get new versions of software deployed, get utilization, get users reporting back to the operators about problems, and those operators get it back to the developers to start the next version, the better they do. Some companies are now doing dozens, if not hundreds, of software upgrades each day. So speed is of the essence. And any kind of procedural formality you introduce, any kind of red tape, as I say here, introduces latency. Latency is kryptonite to DevOps. So you've got to try to create an environment in which they can move very quickly if the next set of changes includes a change in provisioning. At the same time, when you're doing that, remember, it's all too easy for them, since they have all of this capability, it's too easy for them to create nightmares, security provisions that don't get close to your corporate standards, all kinds of crazy procedures and configurations nobody understands. All of that drives up costs. We know that. That's what we've been talking about since the beginning. So you've got to find that magic balance between giving them enough freedom to do their CI/CD thing, but under control. And it's by no means easy. One way in which you can help is to provide them with stack templates that lay out for them the security requirements, what they have to do to access the network, what sizes they're permitted, what configurations of the various instances of VMs they're permitted to request. You can even put controls in place that prevent them from doing things that they're simply not permitted to do. You may introduce some latency there, but that is at the extreme end of the process. We also recommend that it's faster to deploy any instance of anything when it's aligned with the departmental users' roles. You know, role-based management is getting bigger and bigger everywhere. Those of you who have any experience managing directories, you know what I'm talking about. Without roles, you'd spend a bigger proportion of your life updating users than you ever care to imagine. Same thing applies here with multi-cloud. Use role-based management. This way, you can ensure that only the resources you want to allow are put into action by the people involved. Which brings us to visibility. If you can't monitor it and you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So it's crucial to be able to see what's going on in your multi-cloud environment. And just thinking about the idea of maintaining visibility over multiple cloud systems, especially multiple major cloud systems, it doesn't sound easy. As a matter of fact, a recent study by 451 Research took a look at the various different ways in which people can do this and reported back on which ones they select. First thing they reported is that there are still 11% of the population that are fine with having very little visibility into what they're spending. And it's probably because they're very small environments, with very few changes, very standard operations. If not much changes, you don't have to worry as much about what's going on in the cloud. Unfortunately, you'll still get that alert when it's too late. But again, 11% of companies are unwilling to spend to prevent that from happening. And so they're literally going along fat, dumb, and happy. There are a third of these users, third of these companies, that are happy to rely on the reporting they get from the cloud provider. One thing we learned long ago in telecom, the report you get from a carrier, or a provider in this case, will always perfectly match the invoice that you get from that provider. They'll always match perfectly. You'll be astounded how perfect they are until you realize what's going on. So it's important to use something else, to not just depend upon the cloud provider's reporting. But again, the cloud providers do make this available, and 1/3 of companies using multi-cloud, that's what they depend on. Another third, this amazes me, another third are still taking the data feeds from their providers, capturing them, putting them into a spreadsheet, and manually massaging them to get the reporting they need to get visibility into what's going on in utilization and cost control. Now, I'm sure some of them are really good at what they're doing, but it's very manual. A very manual process is very prone to error. And even if they don't have errors, it's very time-consuming. By the time you get your answers, you may be finished with the next period of performance and have made the same mistakes all over again. So not the greatest strategy in the world. It's a very, if it is to be, it's up to me kind of strategy. But a third of companies, that's what they're using. Well, the good news is that a new category of tools has started to emerge. And these are third-party tools that automate the process of collecting, aggregating, analyzing, and reporting on the data coming from the various clouds in your multi-cloud environment. And they can give you consolidated reports as to what's going on. As a matter of fact, they can even give you consolidated real-time visibility. And we'll talk about that again in a moment. But right now, only 20% of companies are using it, in part because they're very new. But those of you in the audience today, you heard it here first. You want to be part of that 20%, not the other 80%. There is a process called tagging, which can help you, that some companies are using. The reason a lot hesitate is because it requires real discipline. You have to do it perfectly, or you shouldn't do it. You need a detailed strategic plan, detailed down to how is the tag applied, how is the tag constructed, when is it applied, when is it reported on, the factors that you need to think about it. What's the strategy? How are you going to go about tagging things? What's the policy behind tagging? Which resources get tagged? How do they get tagged? Are those tags aligned with the initial structure of your multi-cloud environment and the structure of your operations? Do the tags make sense? Are they applied consistently? I mean, here we are at the do. When you're doing the actual tagging, is everybody who's supposed to do it doing it correctly? And if you don't report on it, it's pointless. So are you reporting on it regularly? Are you looking at the reports and taking action based on what you see? This, again, takes everybody. Everybody's got to be aligned on this. And so they have to be trained. They have to be monitored. They have to be coached. They have to be measured. Really, when you think about all that work, you become very encouraged to implement automation. And there are more and more automation tools coming to help you with that. So if you're thinking anything, think automation, automation, automation. Find new ways to automate as many processes as you can. Acid test that automation and then put it into operation. Okay, a couple of best practices regarding visibility. You start out by determining who needs visibility and into what. You don't need everybody watching everything. You need somebody watching everything. But you also need each department keeping a close, careful eye on what they're using in the cloud, how much they're spending. Because every time they request a new resource, they're spending. It's like putting a credit card in their hands. When you're tracking those spends, track them against the budget. Always look at utilization as a percentage of their budget, because the budget represents and reflects your planning. If you did your planning properly, your execution will go properly as long as you're tracking against your budget. You're going to want to make sure that you're gaining visibility into all of the cloud services you're using, not just the major cloud providers, but the minor cloud providers as well, every cloud provider, so you see your true, complete costs. You want to, again, automate the process. Establish alerts that are automatically going to go off whenever a budget is close to being exceeded. When you hit 80% of budget, the administrator for that department and the administrator for the overall cloud environment should both be very aware of that, so you can take corrective action before it becomes an overage or before it becomes a problem. For your cloud administrators, for your IT department, you want to make sure you centralized everything. Now, you want to repeat that on a departmental basis for any department that's using more than one of the clouds in your multi-cloud environment. And there are some departments that will. They'll have a variety of workloads that each require different cloud providers, and you're going to want them to see everything in one place. It's crucial that you see everything in context so that you can identify when things are going wrong, maybe even why things are going wrong. And again, as we talked about before, you want to see the trends. You want to see the outliers as opposed to the trends. You want to see the ones who don't fit into the way everybody else is doing things. The one who's always overrunning their budget, the one that's skyrocketing toward budget. You want to know them before they create a problem. And the only way to do that is to have a centralized view of every department, every project, every team, every individual, and look at all of those views on a regular basis. And take advantage of some of the great analytic tools that are available to analyze your costs and to identify things like we just described, but also how well are you taking advantage of reserved instances and other discount programs? You know, are they working for you? Are the services you obtain from aggregators performing properly, or do you find you have to do additional work for some reason? You're going to want to investigate that because it shouldn't be. And whatever you do, make extensive use of chargebacks and showbacks. You want to be sure that the people who are doing the work see what they're spending. Again, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. The fact that you're observing something affects the thing being observed. When they know you have visibility of their spend, they'll better control their spend. The best way to do that is real time. So you want to be sure that you've configured the right dashboards that you can drill down into to get more and more levels of detail so that you get right down to the specific place the problem is occurring. The faster you can get there, the faster you can remedy it. Okay. This brings us finally to management and control. These are emerging systems, and some of them are from very reputable providers. I won't mention anyone in particular, but you'll see their name at the end of this presentation. What to look for in your multi-cloud cost management system. First off, role-based access. If I said it once, I've said it too many times in the course of this presentation. Role-based access makes it easier for you to manage the entire environment. And role-based access also gives clear definition of who has rights to what and who can get a hold of what when, and allows you to change that if it needs to be changed. You want a system that will allow you to limit the data that's available to people, the actions that's available to individuals, depending on their role. Not every department needs control over every other department's cloud system. So, use role-based control to give everybody just what they need, and no more, no less. You want to make sure that you're keeping a log of all activity. Okay, who launched a VM? Who terminated a VM? Was it terminated prematurely? Was somebody's operation interrupted by that? Who changed the infrastructure? There's constant changes being made to the infrastructure. Most of them have a purpose and a defined definition of why they were changed. Make sure that you have all that. If there is a problem and somebody goes to correct it, make sure you catalog what corrective action was taken and make sure that it didn't change the control you have over costs. Again, a system that provides real-time visibility. You want to see what's happening right now, because as soon as something happens, the clock starts ticking, and you want to be remediating it before too many users get impacted by it. You're also going to want all of this data to help support the decisions you make regarding consumption. Are people overutilizing? Are people underutilizing? Are results being turned in on time? Are they commensurate with the expectations set at the beginning of the project? You want visibility into everything. All cloud services. Who's using them? Why are they using them? What does it cost to be using them? When you have that kind of information, you can then leverage that to truly optimize the system. So now you can make it work better, and make it work cheaper because you're watching how it works. Okay, so let's finish with some overall observations. And there are three. First of all, appreciate how big a challenge you're stepping into. There's hundreds of thousands of VMs over multiple platforms, at least 3 major cloud platforms, and many others. Each has its own protocols. Each has its own billing process, its own security requirements, its own idiosyncrasies. You need to be aware of all of them, and that's huge. So build the right team to make sure that you have people who can handle everything that's involved in your multi-cloud environment. And then again, automation. There'll be more automation than there is today tomorrow, and then more automation after that. More and more automation is being brought to multi-cloud management every day. But they allow you to monitor everything. You can see usage in real time. You can react to things as they're happening. You can repeatedly optimize workflows to allow for things that happen every day. And you do that without having to build huge teams of people to cover every little thing. The more automation, the less dependence upon people. And that brings me to my last point, which is a point about people. Whatever you do, don't try to do this alone. This is new science. These are new operations. Only recently have we started to really combine the different cloud services the way we used to combine different servers, different operating systems. This is much bigger. It's operating much faster. And so there's much more opportunity for error. Enlist the aid of true experts, at least in the early going. There are many experts. Ask them this, when you're talking to an expert, ask them this question: what is your policy regarding knowledge transfer? I want to know that your people will teach my people what they don't know, so that eventually we can be self-sufficient. Any great consulting agency, any great engineering firm knows that they're working to obsolete themselves and to move themselves out of your environment by preparing your people to take over. And that's what you need to look for in a great cloud consulting and engineering firm. With that, I know I didn't leave much time, Scott, but do we have any questions?
Yeah, we have a couple. Thanks, Howard. Great job. And actually, one question is kind of a housekeeping note that it was answered individually, but I just want to mention to everybody. Mark had asked about whether the deck will be shared after the webinar. It is available in your console in the agenda and slides section. So feel free to grab the decks there. Howard, we also had a question. You had a slide about tagging, and Charles was just looking for a little bit more of a definition on what you're talking about with tagging.
Okay, so this is really elementary database management. In many cases, when you're managing data, you may decide to add a field and apply a value to that field, just so that you can separate which records fall into which categories. This is the equivalent of that. For each workload, for each VM, for each entity involved in your cloud environment, you're able to establish an extra field, a tag, that you can use to manage the environment, to take inventory of the environment without having to actually sit and visually run down lists. That's about as simple an analogy as I can come up with.
All right, sounds good. Well, Howard, I think we're gonna have to leave it there. Thanks for a great presentation, really informative.
My pleasure, Scott. Thank you.
And I also want to thank Cloud Health by VMware for making this possible. And now, just before the break, I'm going to turn things over briefly to Raquel.
All right. Thanks, Howard and Scott, for an excellent session. Now we're going on to another short break until about 11:05. So we'll be back then, and the next session will be Securing a Multi-Cloud, Effective Approaches for Getting and Staying Secure. So we'll be right back.